In 1634, the French priest Urbain Grandier was executed on charges of witchcraft. The main evidence of his guilt was not merely a rumor or slander, but a real contract, supposedly signed in blood. Beneath it was Grandier's own signature, and the names of powerful demons, Asmodeus, Leviathan, and Beelzebub. How did the insane idea of selling one soul to the devil travel from naive medieval legends to a deadly tool of the Inquisition? Why was Faust's greatest genius paid for with a hellish price, and why did diabolical pacts explain the phenomenal talent of Paganini and Robert Johnson? Watch until the end to understand how this sinister yet captivating myth continues to shape our fears, ambitions, and even our most personal decisions in the modern world. To truly understand how this archetype permeated every thread of our culture, we need to go back to its very origins, to where despair first encountered the promise of the impossible. We will journey to the 6th century to nascent Christian Europe, where the first whispers of temptation arose, forming the basis of humanity's most sinister pact. The first story we will encounter on our path is that of Theophilus of Odina. His life, seemingly a model of piety, suddenly saw fortune turn its back on him. Theophilus, a worthy and respected archdeacon, unfairly lost his position. Despair gripped his heart more tightly than any chains. He watched as his once deserved status slipped away, and with it, everything he considered the meaning of his existence. And it was at this point of absolute hopelessness, when all human doors had closed, that his gaze turned to where it should not have, to forbidden paths. Through a Jewish sorcerer whispering promises of restored power, Theophilus committed the unthinkable. He made a pact with the devil himself. In exchange for regaining his position, he renounced Christ and the Virgin Mary in writing with his own hand. This ancient legend is not just about a fall. It also leaves a ray of hope behind. Theophilus got what he desired. He was reinstated to his position. His former greatness returned. But the price for this was exorbitant. His conscience gave him no peace, tormenting his soul at night. In the agony of repentance, he spent 40 days and nights in fasting and prayers, calling for help upon the one he had renounced, the Blessed Virgin Mary. And a miracle occurred. The Virgin appeared to him, took the very scroll with the pact from the devil, and returned it to Theophilus, thus breaking his infernal bonds. Theophilus publicly confessed, presented the scroll, and soon after peacefully passed away. The story of Theophilus set the tone. Yes, despair can push one to a pact with darkness. But even from the deepest abyss, there is a path to redemption if the heart truly repents. However, by the 12th, 13th centuries, this seed of hope slowly began to wither under the weight of an increasingly rigid doctrine. The concept of pacta demoniaca or pacts with demons, became systematized and acquired a sinister, irreversible character. The Church no longer viewed such pacts merely as a manifestation of weakness requiring repentance, but branded them as grave, unforgivable heresy. This was not just an error. It was a deliberate betrayal of God, a conscious act of renouncing faith in exchange for worldly goods, wealth, power, love, or for occult powers capable of performing miracles or causing harm. It was at this time that the archetypal image emerged, the signing of a contract. But not with ordinary ink, rather with one's own blood. Imagine this scene, which for centuries stirred minds and fed the deepest fears. The dim candlelight barely penetrates the gloom of the cell. On the table, an ancient, yellowed parchment, a needle glimmering in the flickering flame. A trembling hand, perhaps that of a despairing monk, or an unfortunate peasant, or a student yearning for forbidden knowledge, brings the needle to a finger. A drop of crimson blood falls onto the parchment, leaving an ominous mark that is to become the seal of eternal damnation. Outside the window, shadows deepen. It seems the very air thickens with an unseen presence. But amidst all this horror, if you look closely, the image of the Virgin Mary, ready for intercession, faintly emerges, her figure as if whispering of the last hope for salvation. Although the element of signing in blood became an integral and frightening part of many legends, it was not absolutely universal. Sometimes the pact could be concluded by an oral oath, sometimes through a symbolic ritual. But one thing remained constant: the idea that a person voluntarily gives their immortal soul in exchange for momentary, transient benefits. This transformation from the story of Theophilus with his chance for redemption to the cruel doctrine of the 12th, 13th centuries shows how the myth of the diabolical pact evolved, becoming increasingly darker and more uncompromising, gradually turning from a cautionary tale into a lethal accusation capable of destroying lives. And this was just the beginning. Soon, the abstract idea of a pact with dark forces not only took root in people's minds, it mutated, transforming into a sinister doctrine capable of destroying fates and fueling pyres. That was the darkest period in the history of this concept, the era of the Inquisition and mass witch trials, which unfolded in the 15th century and reached their peak. If in the 12th, 13th centuries pacta demoniaca or pacts with demons were considered acts of heresy betraying God for worldly goods, or occult powers, by the 15th century this idea had transformed into a legally formalized accusation directed against thousands of innocent people. Inquisitors, driven by fear and fanaticism, systematized the idea that witches and sorcerers did not merely invoke demons, but entered into a personal, often formalized, pact with the devil. For them, it was not merely a superstitious fabrication, but cold, tangible proof. The accused were charged with signing the devil's book with their blood, swearing allegiance to the Prince of Darkness, or offering him a part of their soul to gain supernatural abilities, casting spells, causing crop failure, inflicting diseases, or even transcending their physical body. This doctrine became a central element of the accusations and the basis for the so-called evidence in thousands of trials, leading to torture and inevitable executions. Imagine the gloomy courtroom of the Inquisition. The air is heavy with the smell of frankincense, fear, and unspoken suffering. In the center, the accused, exhausted and broken, kneels, surrounded by smoldering torches whose flames cast bizarre shadows on the stern faces of the judges. And now, before you, a priest in a black cowl, his figure towering over the table. He slowly raises a rolled parchment, heavy, ancient, covered with incomprehensible writings. He unrolls it slowly so all present can see. His voice is loud and full of righteous anger. Here it is. Here is the irrefutable proof. The contract, signed with his own blood. And such scenes were not fiction. History preserves the shocking case of 1634, which vividly demonstrates the extent of madness and absurdity to which persecution can go. This refers to the French priest Urbain Grandier, prior of the Loudun parish, an educated, charismatic man who aroused envy and suspicion. Grandier was accused of witchcraft and, most horrifyingly, of making a pact with the devil. The Inquisition discovered undeniable proof, a real contract. The document, which they claimed was written in Latin with a mixture of mysterious symbols, was signed by Grandier himself, allegedly with his blood, and, even more terrifyingly, contained the signatures of several high-ranking demons. Among them appeared names such as Asmodeus, Leviathan, Beelzebub, Lucifer, Satan, as well as local demons responsible for the possession of the nuns at the Ursuline convent, where the scandal erupted. Imagine this scroll, a list of infernal fiends, each seemingly having personally attested to this diabolical pact. This document with demonic seals and signatures became the central element of the accusation, lending it absolute legal credibility in the eyes of the judges and the crowd. It mattered not that Grandier himself denied all accusations until his last breath. This parchment, signed with blood and curses, was his sentence. He was burned at the stake, and his fate became a grim warning of how easily fear and fanaticism can turn fiction into deadly truth, and the myth of the diabolical pact into a real instrument for destroying human lives. This incident, like thousands of others across Europe, showed that the idea of a pact with the devil evolved from a cautionary tale about repentance, as in the case of Theophilus of Odena, to a legally binding and deadly accusation against which there was no defense. The flames of the Inquisition did not just burn bodies, they burned logic and reason themselves, turning fantasies into sentences and faith into a ruthless weapon. The flames of the Inquisition did not just burn bodies, they burned logic and reason themselves, turning fantasies into sentences and faith into a ruthless weapon. But even in the darkest times, when fear and superstition reigned supreme, the human mind continued to seek answers and imagination, to create stories capable of encompassing the main questions of existence. And so, from the depths of popular rumor, from the dust of old legends, was born perhaps the most famous and influential iteration of the myth of the diabolical pact. A story that changed everything, the myth of Faust. In the 16th century, along the dusty roads of fragmented German principalities, through towns and villages, not preachers but thin, unassuming booklets began to circulate. These were the so-called folk books, *Volksbuch*. Cheap, accessible to everyone, they quickly became bestsellers of their time, spreading the captivating and terrifying story of Dr. Johann Faust across the world. This name became a legend, although there is still debate about how strongly it was connected to the real Johann Georg Faust, an alchemist and black magician who indeed lived in the early 16th century and gained fame as a possessor of dark powers and astonishing knowledge. But popular rumor, as always, proved stronger than facts, weaving a whole web of myths around his name. In these folk books, Faust was presented as an eminent scholar who, having exhausted all available sciences, theology, medicine, philosophy, discovered that the world could not give him true, boundless knowledge. His mind craved more, his soul yearned beyond the ordinary, and this craving led him to a terrible decision. He made a pact with the devil, or more precisely, with his emissary, the demon Mephistopheles. The price was monstrous. In exchange for limitless magical powers, the deepest occult knowledge, and 24 years of carefree worldly pleasures, Faust promised to surrender his immortal soul. This was a classic scenario, short-term, dazzling gain in exchange for eternal damnation. The stories abounded with descriptions of his travels, his encounters with mythical creatures, his ability to raise the dead and perform unseen wonders. But beneath all this outward bravado lay a deep moral lesson, a strict warning. The *Volksbuch* about Faust were, in essence, cautionary tales. They cried out, beware of hubris, beware of an excessive craving for knowledge and worldly temptations, for behind them lies inevitable downfall. Everyone knew that 24 years would pass unnoticed, and in the end, the devil would come for his payment, dragging the unfortunate Faust's soul into the abyss of hell. This story not only entertained, it shaped a cultural archetype deeply rooted in the European consciousness. But the myth of Faust was too powerful, too encompassing, to remain merely a folk cautionary tale. It was retold, adapted, and it continued to live until it fell into the hands of one of the greatest geniuses of German literature, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. His monumental tragedy Faust, which he wrote throughout his life and completed only in 1831, shortly before his death, completely overturned the Faustian myth. Goethe took the old story as a basis, but breathed entirely new life into it, transforming it from a cautionary tale about a sinner into a profound philosophical exploration of human nature. In Goethe, Faust is not merely a black magician greedy for pleasure or power. He is a titan of spirit, a dissatisfied scholar who has mastered all sciences, yet still feels emptiness. He reached all the peaks of human knowledge, but they brought him no true meaning. His thirst for knowledge is boundless, his striving for absolute truth insatiable, and it is precisely this insatiable thirst that makes him a worthy object for a wager with Mephistopheles. In Goethe's Faust, there is no simple contract for the purchase and sale of a soul. Mephistopheles offers him a wager. He will serve Faust, fulfilling all his desires and granting him any pleasures and knowledge. But if Faust ever reaches a moment of such absolute perfection, such deep satisfaction, that he wishes to stop it, saying, "Oh, stay a while. You are so fair, verwildox, du bist so schön," only then will his soul belong to Mephistopheles, and he will die. This change is not merely a plot device, it is a profound philosophical revolution. For as long as Faust constantly strives, as long as he is never satisfied and always seeks more, he will never utter those fatal words. His soul remains beyond the devil's grasp, because the very essence of his being is eternal movement, eternal search, eternal striving. Imagine this scene: Faust in his study. It is not just a room, it is a labyrinth of folios, scrolls, alchemical instruments, yellowed star charts. Here dwells the spirit of eternal research, but also the spirit of enduring longing. Through the ancient stained glass window, adorned with patterns, a thin ray of light penetrates, piercing the gloom and illuminating Faust's focused face. His eyes burn with a feverish, insatiable fire. He extends his hand, not towards a book or a test tube with an unknown potion lying on the table, but towards the invisible yet palpable essence of Mephistopheles, making this great wager not only with the devil, but with creation itself. This is not a pact born of despair, but a challenge, an act of boundless will. Goethe's Faust becomes a symbol of humanity's insatiable thirst for knowledge, for truth, for perfection, even if this path leads through doubts, temptations, and even apparent falls. Unlike Theophilus of Adana, who repented and was saved, or the unfortunate victims of the Inquisition, who were forced to confess and executed, Goethe's Faust finds the possibility of salvation not through repentance for sin or abandonment of his desires, but through his tireless, eternal striving for development, for the attainment of an ideal. His soul, ultimately, is saved not because he avoided the pact, but because he never stopped striving never succumbed to complete satisfaction that would have halted his progress. This version of the myth became a cornerstone of Western culture, showing that a pact with the devil can be not only a path to damnation, but also a metaphor for the greatest human journey, a journey deep within oneself to the most hidden mysteries of existence and the boundless expanses of knowledge. It is a story of how the human spirit, even when encountering darkness, can find its own path to light through endless search and self-improvement. But what if this quest not only leads to light, but also plunges into such depths where the line between genius and madness, between divine gift and diabolical pact, blurs? The myth of selling one's soul to the devil associated for millennia with occultism, with greedy sorcerers who craved worldly riches like Theophilus of Adana, or with witches who signed blood pacts for evil, suddenly crossed the threshold and burst into the holy of holies of the human soul, into art. It became the ultimate, most shocking explanation for supernatural talent that refused to fit within the boundaries of the ordinary. In the early 19th century, when the European consciousness was still saturated with stories of Dr. Faust, who made a pact with Mephistopheles for knowledge and pleasures, and when quite recently, in the 17th century, the French priest Urbain Grandier was executed based on a discovered pact with demons, a man burst onto the world stage whose music was so inhuman that contemporaries found no other explanation but a pact with darkness. This refers to Niccolò Paganini, the Italian violin virtuoso. His fingers glided across the strings with such speed and precision, drawing forth sounds that seemed impossible for a human. The revolutionary technique he commanded shocked the audience. His violin seemed to sing and weep, growl and whisper, imitating voices and sounds previously unimaginable for the instrument. His pale face, deep-set eyes, and thinness, coupled with constant rumors about his dissolute lifestyle and mysterious illnesses, only added fuel to the fire. It was whispered that the soul of a deceased beloved was built into his violin, and that in reality he had sold his own soul, forging his talent in hellish flames for such power over sound. Every Paganini concert was not merely a musical performance, it was an immersion into a mystical atmosphere where the line between virtuoso and black magician became blurred. His melodies, diabolically beautiful and terrifying, gave rise to countless legends, forever inscribing his name into the pantheon of those who, according to tradition, dared to make a pact with infernal forces for greatness. Or take America, where in the 1930s, at the dusty crossroads of Mississippi, a myth was born that became the cornerstone of all modern music. There, where shadows danced under the full moon and the air was thick with the scent of hope and despair, young Robert Johnson, according to legend, sold his soul for masterful guitar playing. He was an unremarkable musician, playing rather poorly, until one day he disappeared for several months. When he returned, his guitar spoke entirely differently. Chords wove into mesmerizing patterns, his voice penetrated directly into the soul, and the slide across the strings produced moans that sent shivers down the spine. It was said that deep at night, at a dark crossroads, under the flickering light of a full moon, his shadow merged with an even darker figure who reached out, took his guitar, tuned it, and then returned it, endowing his soul to the devil and his fingers with unearthly mastery. This myth of the Crossroads Pact became a symbol of the blues, poignant and melancholic, exerting a colossal influence on world rock and blues music. His songs, such as Crossroad Blues, only reinforced this legend, transforming him from a simple musician into a figure shrouded in mysticism and curse. Why then did humanity so readily attribute diabolical pacts to those whose abilities transcended understanding? Perhaps it was a way to explain the unexplainable, to reduce astonishing, terrifying genius to something that could be classified, even if it was a pact with evil forces. In a world where belief in *pacta demoniaca* was part of daily life, and witches' books were signed in blood, superhuman talent easily fit into this chilling logic. This gave art a dark yet incredibly alluring aura, making it a forbiddance fruit that enticed even more strongly. In a sense, such legends became a reflection of the deep human desire to comprehend mystery, to give meaning to what seemed impossible. For if talent is bestowed by darkness, it means it is not merely unique. It is dangerous, yet in this danger lies its greatest power, its mesmerizing beauty. The legends of Paganini and Johnson are stories not only about the violin and guitar, but also about how the human mind tries to cope with greatness that cannot be explained by logic, finding solace or horror in the most ancient of pacts, the one made with the devil, and to this day, these stories continue to nourish world culture. A reminder that beyond the ordinary, in the most hidden corners of our soul, lies something capable of both destroying and creating something truly diabolically beautiful. This diabolically beautiful, or terrible, doesn't always require a mystical encounter with a horned lord of hell. What if the most terrible pact is made not in the Gothic castles of medieval Europe or at the dusty crossroads of Mississippi, but deep within us? In a world where belief in a literal, horned devil gives way to science and psychology, the ancient myth of the pact with darkness has not disappeared. It has simply evolved, becoming a powerful metaphor, resonating in the most hidden corners of our subconscious. In modern psychology, this myth is interpreted not as a literal agreement with an infernal being, but as a deep archetype, symbolizing that very moment of despair when a person is ready to make radical, compromising decisions. It is an internal pact with the devil, made not with ink on parchment, but with silent agreement with oneself. Like Theophilus of Adana in the 6th century, who resorted to black magic to regain status, or the countless witches of the 15th century Inquisition, who were accused of selling their souls for worldly powers. We today make these pacts for short-term gain, success, power, knowledge, recognition, or simply relief from unbearable suffering. Consider Dr. Faust, whose myth so powerfully captivated minds in the 16th century and then was reinterpreted by Goethe in the early 19th century. Faust desired boundless knowledge and pleasures, and he was willing to give his soul. In his story, Mephistopheles offers a wager where Faust's soul will be claimed only if he finds a moment so beautiful that he wishes to stop it, saying, "Oh, stay a while. You are so fair, wild docs, du bist so schön." This is not just a story about selling one's soul. It is a profound exploration of the boundaries of human desires, ambitions, and their consequences. In psychology, this reflects an internal conflict. To what extent are we willing to sacrifice our principles, morality, even a part of our identity, to achieve what we desire? Or recall the legend of Niccolo Paganini, whose virtuosity in the early 19th century was so phenomenal that people seriously attributed it to a pact with the devil. Or Robert Johnson, the 1930s bluesman who, according to myth, sold his soul at the crossroads for his talent. These stories, in essence, are not about real pacts, but about acknowledging that great talent or success sometimes seems so inhuman that it demands some supernatural price. Metaphorically, this is the price for obsession, for absolute dedication to one thing that can consume everything else in your life. In the modern world, such a pact means making decisions where short-term, apparent gain is achieved at the cost of long-term moral, ethical, or emotional consequences. This could be an executive who sacrifices ethics for quarterly results, a student who cheats for a diploma, or a person who chooses comfort and security, giving up their true dreams and calling. In each of these cases, there is a symbolic loss of a part of one's true self, one's inner voice, one's soul in pursuit of external, transient goods. In these moments, when we look at ourselves in the mirror, the reflection may be blurred, our face distorted by internal conflict. Behind us, perhaps, flicker symbols of success, an expensive car, a prestigious office, piles of money, but they are shrouded in a dull, threatening light. This is not the light of victory, but the gleam of a pact we made with ourselves. The ancient archetype of the pact with the devil continues to resonate in our consciousness because it reflects eternal internal conflicts between ambition and conscience, ideals and pragmatism. It reminds us of the thin line we often cross, unaware that giving up on ourselves little by little, step by step, ultimately leads to the loss of something far more valuable than any material success. We ourselves, without realizing it, make our own pacts with the devil in our personal lives and careers, and sometimes only discover the full price of these deals when it is too late. Thus, the devil from ancient legends, from the stories of Faust and Urbain Grandier, whose contracts were allegedly found in 1634 with demon signatures, has transformed into our inner demon, temptation, fear, despair, ambition, which push us towards compromises. It is not an external enemy, but an internal conflict that we must recognize and overcome so as not to lose what makes us truly alive. For our soul, our true self, is priceless, and no pact is worth its loss. From medieval parables to modern internal conflicts, the myth of the pact with the devil has proven to be not merely an ancient superstition, but a powerful, evolving mirror of the human soul. It has always reflected our eternal struggle between ambitions and what we are willing to sacrifice for their realization. If the devil is no longer an external entity, but an internal temptation, then with what exactly do we make pacts today? And what invaluable thing do we lose, unaware of the true price of these silent agreements? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you made similar pacts in your life? Subscribe to the channel to continue our philosophical journey into the depths of human consciousness, and like this video if it made you think.